Good. So we'll have a welcome and an introduction. So I think, as you log on, just please try to introduce yourself in the chat box. We will go into sort of the overview of this workshop in Workstream. Then we'll have a bigger discussion with some interesting polls that we're trying out on how to resource this decarbonization workflow. And then we'll go into breakout rooms on sort of the project pipeline, how to set this up and look more into the funding and financing. And then we will introduce the workshop 3.2, which will take place on Thursday afternoon at the same time. And of course, this is just a reminder, this is sort of the third work stream of this three-part workshop series. And we're glad to have you. The first one, we really looked at the approaches to transitioning. So what existing approaches and workflows do we already have, and what do those look like in detail? And then in the second one, we tried to come up with sort of how to draft these requests for proposals that would allow us to sign long-term agreements with energy service companies to buy energy as a service rather than procure and fuel diesel generators. And then this last work stream is looking at funding and financing, and how do we come up with this financing mechanism for this whole process. So for a welcome and introduction, feel free to continue writing your name, location, and organization in the chat box. And if you haven't joined before and feel like speaking up and introducing yourself, you can do that as well. Good. So I see we have people from Europe, New York, Middle East, so great to have you all. And with that, I will hand it over to Mark for an overview of this workstream and workshop.
Great, thanks Amy. Straight to the next slide, and welcome everyone. Yep, so just a quick recap. As Amy said, the first week's work stream was really focusing on, the process. What are the key steps in delivering that workflow, and how do we, and we also critically reviewed it to see how we can improve it going forward so that we can include it for the delivery of energy projects with focused on long-term agreements for PowerPoint agreements and leasing agreements. Okay, next slide, please. Yep, and workstream 2, which was last week, was actually looking at the procurement process. We have a very clear deliverable in that UNDP would like to sign long-term agreements with 20+ energy service companies in Q1 of 2021. And to be able to get there, we need to design and produce the RFP and the LTA itself. And this is the main point of this program, is to expose our sister agencies, colleagues to this, to support the process, to make sure that it can be adapted for their needs in delivering these PPA leasing agreements solutions through piggybacking the process in terms of the workflow, or even the long-term agreements themselves. Excellent, thanks Amy. And then really today and on Thursday, we're talking about money. Today, it's going to be slightly different. In the past, the work streams have been, the Tuesday's been focused on getting everyone up to speed, and then the Thursday looking at sort of crowdsourcing information and trying to get an idea of the direction of where everyone wants to go. This week it's split. So today we will be focusing on funding the workflow. So what we actually mean is, what solutions are there to resourcing the internal expense of managing the decarbonisation workflow. We'll go to a little bit more detail in a moment. And then Thursday, we will be looking at how do we finance the solution. So, identifying options for improving the economics to transitioning to sustainable energy solutions is where we will be. Okay, Amy? So, yep, today we will be looking at the resourcing options that are available for managing the decarbonisation workflow. And again, we'll go into a little bit more detail shortly. And then the second half is going to be really interesting. We're going to actually see and explore with you funding solutions. So how do we as a team go about paying for the technical resources and upfront costs associated to the decarbonisation workflow. So we're going to have something very concrete as we sort of go forward to discuss and engage with you as we go forward. Maybe the next slide, please. So, yep, next one. So really, here we're looking at resourcing the decarbonisation workflow. So this is the whole point of today's discussions. And what do we mean by resourcing? Well, what we're actually talking about here is what personnel, financial resources do we require as an organisation to develop a project pipeline? And we've used this project pipeline term a number of times throughout these presentations, but let's define that is. So what do we mean by a project pipeline? Well, it's really the process of identifying possible sustainable energy solutions at agency offices, warehouses, staff accommodations, or compounds that can be delivered through a PPA or lease agreement. So if you can remember the first discussions around the workflow using UNDP's model, this is taking us up to the end of step 2. Okay, Amy, next slide. So what does this resourcing cover? It's the in-house and external technical support that's required. It involves the sort of purchase, installation, and monitoring of remote energy monitoring devices. It includes the energy audit, and it includes the business case development. So that's what we're looking at. How do we resource that? And we're going to look at it in 2 ways. We're going to look at the human resources, and we're going to also look at the financial resources. So really, what are our options? Well, we can use or build our existing internal team, or we can build an internal team. The sort of, I wouldn't say problems or cons, but things to be aware of with such solution as staff costs. Obviously, if we are looking at a UN agency, that's quite an overhead that we need to cover in terms of, obtaining grant funding for that team. There are obviously contractual options. We can look at TAs and consultants and so forth. But what really causes problems there is contract breaks. We really want a continuity of staff. And if, your team is built up on people with different contracts, and they're all taking 1-month breaks at different times, it can cause a problem. And of course, we still have this sort of continued funding problem. We need to maintain staff levels. But one thing that we've noticed, and I'm sure you have if you're working in this field, is that you have competing priorities. So although your TOR is maybe saying, please develop our workflow for delivering the transition of energy solutions at our offices, they will be called on to do other things. So, it does cause problems in sort of working on the solutions. And of course, if you need to build your team, that takes time. Recruitment processes within the UN are very slow. And of course, looking at, why the GPA exists and, the community that we're working with is that, energy is a low priority within a number of these UN agencies. So although all of us are focused on delivering change and keen to see this going forward, our higher levels of management may not necessarily share this, and the focus of the organisation itself may be elsewhere. The great thing about this is that you actually do then have internal resources to review the design process. You also have continuity of staff. That's, of course, if we're not on rotation and have to go everywhere every few years. But there's also, we cannot devalue the knowledge that, a team has of the organisation in terms of what will work, what will not work. So, there is a lot of strengths in having that internal team. Next one. So we can, as we've discussed in Workstream 1, is outsource to our public partners, the likes of UNDP or GIZ. Now you may say that they don't understand our organisational needs, but that will improve with time. As you work with any partner, the relationship builds and strengthens as we expose each other to the way of working. But it's also acknowledged that even if you are outsourcing to one of these development partners, you will still need at least one internal specialist to go through the designs, make sure they're okay, and sign off on them. Generally, outsourcing, it's cheaper. You have a consistent approach because they are working along a standard workflow, as we discussed a couple of weeks back. You also gain access to the specialist skills and experience that are required to deliver this. And, they can focus on the delivery of these projects. That is their main focus. They're not going to be distracted by other calls of their time. Amy, the third one, please. Then we have outsourcing to private sector. What do we mean by this? Well, this is just going out to the local consultant to do this work for you. So this is, as we said, looking at developing the business case and all the work that goes before that. Well, one problem is that they may not necessarily understand the organizational need. There is a problem or a concern of inconsistent approach. So for instance, if your Nigerian office is using one consultant, your Kenyan office is using another, there may be a difference of approaches that are taken, so you're not standardizing the way forward, which may lead to some concerns. It can potentially be an expensive option. We all know the price of consultancy support. Obviously, getting the right consultant does provide value for money. There is also a sort of concern. This may or may not be of a big importance to your organization, but we are releasing critical infrastructure information to a third party outside of the UN system. But the good thing is you are getting access to the skills and experience that you're required. Amy, next slide. Then we have accepting in-kind support. So as most of you are aware, NORCAP have a energy deployee scheme where you could call upon NORCAP to provide you with technical support to your organization delivering a specific project. And also we are increasingly getting offers of support from the private sector where they are saying, we have engineers, we have a corporate social responsibility program. We would like to send some of our engineers to help support some of this work. The concerns around this really, if you're engaging with the private sector on in-kind support, is the sustainability. That organization is only going to be able to provide you with a certain level of continued support. And also there is a significant conflict of interest. Having worked in the private sector myself, as you offer your services for free, you are expecting something back in return. However, with the UN procurement rules, if you're involved in the assessment of a particular project, you cannot then be involved in the delivery of the solution because there is a perceived conflict in that you're arranging the situation. You could potentially arrange the terms of reference to suit only your needs. And of course, there's potential deployment limitations with regards to all these in that, if you need a team of 8 to 10 people, are you really going to manage to get 8 or 10 from a combination of NORCAP and the private sector? But what this does do, it does give you access to skills and experience. And, having, as many of you know, I am a NORCAP deployee myself, and having had this conversation is that NORCAP are focused on sustainability. So as long as the deployee is adding value, as long as the program that they're working on is adding value, and as long as that program is adding value to NORCAP's own goals to its donors, then the deployee can remain in post for as long as funding remains there. So it's not like a sort of refugee deployment program where you get 12 months and that's it. So there is some sustainability built in around NORCAP. Okay, Amy, the last one. And other. I'm not so sure if there are other ways that we find the human resources to deliver that. If anyone can think of something, please do raise your hand, mention it now, or type something in to the box next door. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on that before we go on to our first poll? No, excellent. All right, Amy, next slide. This is where it's going to get interesting. And I'm going to hand over to Thomas. We're going to use a Zoom poll for the first time. So we're going to try and get some idea of your preferred thoughts. But so over to you, Thomas, on this one.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, exactly. It's the first time we are trying to do this, so please bear with us if it doesn't work at the first time. The idea of the poll is we would like to discuss these options that Mark outlined with you. So we're going to ask you two questions related to each other. So what is your preferred option and what is your least preferred option? And then we can discuss why, and this will be the basis of our further discussions in the workshop. So Amy, the floor is yours. Please pull up the questions.
Thomas, I can see a quick note from Catherine Howell, who's talking about from ICRC, is looking at a potential hybrid model. So if everyone can see that in the chat, if that's a model that you would like to go down, then please tick the other box when the survey comes up, okay?
Okay. Do we have all the answers, Amy?
Not yet. We're halfway there.
So colleagues, please just quickly decide.
Still need about 10 more.
Let's give only a couple of seconds, Amy.
Yeah.
Then we can pull it up.
All right. And if you haven't voted, I will close the poll now. Now we'll share the results.
Okay, interesting. So 36%, a third of the participants on the call would potentially outsource this to public development partners like UNDP, GIZ. And there's an equal share of using an existing internal team or building a new one, and others. Can I maybe invite those who said others to explain a little bit further what you have in mind?
Yeah,
Maybe.
hi, this is Oliver, if I may. Oliver from UNFPA.
Hey.
I picked others based on what you just said to the colleague from ICRC. We're really also looking at a hybrid option, which is a kind of an internal team, but we would definitely outsource, you know, solar panel installation and these kind of things, as we talked about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, to UNDP or GIZ or somebody like that. So that's the hybrid model we have in mind. Over.
I mean, I assume even if you go for an externalization or an outsourcing of any kind, you would need to have relevant internal experience also to monitor the outsourcing and make sure you get the quality you're asking for. Anybody else on others? Maybe Catherine, do you want to come in?
Hi there. Yes, sorry, that global challenge we all have of unmuting at the right. Hear me. Okay, yes. So similar to the comments I put in the chat box, I think this is very much a sort of multidisciplinary sort of project for the ICRC, and we would not go it alone, build our own internal team, although that, you know, might have been a sort of preference of, you know, the way we've worked on other projects historically, but really looking at leveraging the capabilities within potential partnership models, for example, with GIZ or private sector consultancies. And so there would definitely be a sort of hybrid approach from our side, where we would look at different elements of the project lifecycle and think about where we want to build our own capabilities over the long term. And it might also change through time, so that we have to sort of bring in a higher level of consultancy support in the coming few years, but slowly over the course of time also build into some historical knowledge and expertise with a kind of internal team as well. There's definitely a need to also think about this new internal team, given the nature of the energy file being very transversal. So where we place the expertise, I think the preference is to the new and less so the existing. But again, it's still somewhat hybrid in that respect, depending on the delivery model. So happy to go into more detail if needed.
Thank you. Thank you. Then can we go to the second question? What is your least preferred option? Same exercise. Amy will pull out the polls. Please quickly respond and then we talk about this.
Be able to see it now? Yes, good.
Yes, yes, all good.
Give it a bit longer, getting close. All right, I'll close the poll. Should be able to see the results.
Okay, thank you. Okay, almost half of the people on the call wouldn't accept in-kind support, or would see the in-kind support from private sector as the least preferred option. And I guess the reasons are on the table. You don't have the quality control. You can only do this with a one-off. You would exclude this company from the next steps and all this. Would anybody like to respond why he or she would not outsource it to development partners?
Hi, Mark. It's Nyasha here.
Nyasha.
Now, it's just from WFP. I think on the basis of how we would normally operate, private in-kind contributions are very much welcome, but when we work with partner agencies, it's normally on a cost recovery basis. So that's the reason why.
Okay. Okay, understood. Okay, so interesting exercise. I think, does anybody want to comment on these polls further? Otherwise, I think we can go on to the next agenda point. Okay, then I hand it over back to you, Mark.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move on to the second bit of resourcing, and that's around funding. In other words, how do we pay for the in-house external technical support that's required? How do we buy, the remote energy monitoring devices? How do we install them? What the cost of installing and the monitoring of those as well. and we also have to pay for the energy audit, and we also have to pay someone to write the business case. So there's a number of options that we can pay for this. Obviously, there's grants, so the traditional way of receiving money from a donor, that can be on an annual basis, which, as we know, can be problematic in the sense that the donor can change their focus as they move from one hot topic to another. And therefore, although we may have some money in year one, we don't necessarily get any money to continue the program on year 2, 3, 4, and so on. So, we really, benefit from sort of multi-year funding if there's a real focus on this, so we can actually dedicate some resources on this for the long term. And then there are also, do we talk about, standalone projects or multiple projects? Do we get, for instance, does our Nigerian operation just get some financing to do its own project, or do we work with the regional office or the HQ to look at receiving some funding, and we can do multiple projects and potentially have some economies of scale going through there. So, one way is the traditional grants. The other one is revolving funds. We'll go into a little bit more detail of what we mean by revolving funds on Thursday, and thankfully one of our colleagues from UNHCR, Irene, will be presenting their revolving fund. So, we can come back to this on more detail. But in terms of, paying for the workflow, paying for the development of the project pipeline, how do we do that? How do we sort of put money back into this? So is there a way, for instance, that we take some money out of a pot to pay for our own, a particular site to get it to, the end of step 2 in UNDP's model. And then if we're lucky to fund it, we put that money back in so that someone else can do it. But should our project not move forward for one reason or another, we've paid for it, we've done it, but unfortunately it doesn't move forward, and we walk away. The pot doesn't get replenished. So, it's a no loss system. And then we have the internal carbon tax, and colleagues from WFP are a better place to discuss this, where we can actually pay money into a pot to deliver these solutions from a carbon tax associated to diesel usage as a whole for vehicles, which is what WFP's model is, in the fact that they have a global leasing program, and I think it's $10 per month is put on every vehicle as part of the insurance package that is then used to fund energy projects. More interestingly, can we put a carbon tax on flights and use that money to pay for sustainable energy projects? So we're looking at bringing internal money, so this isn't new money, but internal money to pay for these projects. So taking that carbon tax forward to pay for some good. And again, in-kind support. We can, get all this done by the private sector. Again, there's still questions of conflicts of interest. They generally would like something back at the end of this. Sustainability, how long they were going to do it for, how long is that consistent, how are we going to get a consistent approach? Amy, the last one, and again, does anyone else see any other funding options of getting a project to a business case written? Yep, thanks, William. We have the energy savings performance contracting. Again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more on Thursday. This is a process where you go to an energy service company, you ask them to undertake an energy audit of your building, your facilities, and then they work out how much money they can save you by changing the source of energy, the sort of energy efficiency of the project, and then you pay them 50% of those savings until the money is repaid. It's a interesting approach, and it's one that we'll explore next Thursday, because I think there's problems around the procurement process, and that's something that we can talk about next in the next call, is that we have an organization that's doing the design and then picking up the delivery process. So it's something that we need to look at together. External carbon tax, yes, we can look at how we can use other people's carbons to pay for that. We can certainly look at that, but to me, I would put that as a grant for now. So when we come into the next, we can put that forward. And carbon credits, yes, that's going to be more associated with the sort of payment of the process, and we'll pick that up on Thursday. So Thomas and Amy, if we go to the next one, we're going to hand over to another poll, and in the other, if we can put in the energy saving performance contract, if that is your preferred or least process, put that as other. If you want to look at external carbon tax, associate that to a grant, and then we'll run the poll. Okay, over to you, Thomas and Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Again, same exercise. We want to keep you engaged and get your opinion. So what is your preferred funding option? Of course, it's a bit black and white, and I guess a lot will come up to grants, but still, maybe you also have other preferred options. So colleague, floor is yours. Choose which one you prefer, and then we'll talk about this.
Leave it open for a bit longer. About 10 more seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll. Last chance to vote. All right. There you go. So there's the results. You should be able to see them.
Oh, wow. Didn't expect such a high number for revolving funds. That's interesting. Can we briefly discuss this? Why do you think the revolving fund would be a preferred option? Do feel free to unmute yourself and come in.
Well, until at least in theory, sorry, it looks like a self-sustaining mechanism. So definitely it's quite attractive, even though the economics of that has really to be thought quite carefully.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone want to come into internal carbon tax?
Hi, this is Oliver. I mean, UNFPA, we have an internal carbon tax on air flights or air tickets.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it works. I think maybe we need to increase the percentage to get more money. We're using this carbon tax in together with the capital budget. So we do everything we bigger investments like solar panels we fund from our capital budget. But smaller things we fund from the carbon tax, and buying offsets, obviously, we also do from the carbon tax. With the revolving fund, I'm also surprised that so many people chose that. I don't know. I mean, probably you need a very quick return in investment, else it's going to take you forever to establish like green offices everywhere. Because if you need to wait for 10 years to recover the money you invested before you can do the next one, it's going to take obviously a long time. Over.
Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, and I also understood for some our colleagues, it's quite difficult, especially those who are very decentralized, to actually collect, for example, the savings into a revolving fund. So it isn't easy to set up a structure like that. Okay, then we're going to go to the next one, and you guessed it already. It's the question, what is your least preferred option? Amy, over to you.
All right, the poll should be up. Getting halfway there. Give it 20 more seconds. All right, last call to submit your least preferred funding option.
Okay. Not surprised on the in-kind support. But then can I ask someone who voted for the internal carbon tax why this is the least preferred funding option?
Hi, Thomas. It's James. I just speculate that that might be quite administratively burdensome, you know, more trouble than it's worth, perhaps. But I don't know. That's not based on our experience or anything. That's just what I imagine. So if anyone can shed light on that, would be good to know.
Yeah.
For me, internal carbon tax, I think it is quite difficult for the different offices to accept part of their operational expenses to go into carbon tax because of various reasons, you know, comparing themselves with the HQ sometimes with the other offices. That's what I have found in UNDP at least.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Stephen. Anybody else on this one?
Anna from UNHCR. I just would like to say that we have been proposing to our leadership for the past 3 years to have a carbon tax. In that instance, we were proposing to use the carbon tax to pay for our carbon offsets. But it was met very coldly, and there was a big resistance in the top management to that idea, despite the fact that quite many UN agencies have some sort of tax, UNDP, I know, and WFP, and many others. So it seems that it is possible, but there is a big resistance. Over.
Thanks, Anna. Can you explain what kind of mechanism you suggested? Was it also
we're proposing various mechanisms based on WFP experience, or just even automatically, even because it was about carbon offsets, even the simplest ones, so that from each travel ticket it will be automatically paid, or maybe put into some internal fund. And there was just, people were afraid that it would be too cumbersome, but experience shows that it's possible. So yeah, there should be a managerial will for that.
Yeah. Anna, Mark here, with the sort of new directorial support on climate change with your climate change lead, it might be an appropriate time to go back, but conversation for another time.
Yeah, hopefully.
I remember I had one discussion about an internal carbon tax with an agency I won't mention here. And it was the simple thing as you outlined, Anna, to put an extra couple of % on each ticket. And the answer was, but then we are flying less. And I thought, exactly, that's the point. But anyway, okay. Thanks for your votes, and back to you, Mark.
If I may quickly, this is Oliver again. I want just, because now this was mentioned 2 or 3 times that it is such an administrative burden with the carbon tax. I just want to, I think, debunk that myth a little bit, because we have been collecting carbon tax now for, I don't know, probably 5, 6 years, and it's pretty simple. I mean, we didn't get to the stage where we automatically deduct it or add it to each ticket price, but it's just like quarterly running a report on all the expenditures for air tickets, and then charging the same fund code with a 2% tax. I think from my experience, this is much easier than a revolving fund, as was mentioned earlier. It's very tricky to get the money back from, if you're a decentralized organization, from a revolving fund back into your original funding source. And I think from my personal experience, the tax seems to be administratively much more lighter than any other option that was listed right now. Over.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you everyone for that. And what we will be doing is using these poll results to help us guide us with the sort of concrete actions going forward. If there's a large interest in a particular route, then we can certainly look at producing guidance, seeing what's out there and sharing the resources. So that's why we've done it, to look at which direction you're thinking in, to actually steer the direction of the next step. So thank you for everyone on that. And then this one is going to be interesting. So here we're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about getting more money. So what we're saying is we've just talked about the problems of funding the workflow, trying to get a number of projects assessed and having business cases ready to look at, for what's the most viable solution, through power purchase agreements, lease agreements, and all the others. But what we're looking at here, Amy, next slide, please, is how about coming together and getting some money to actually do this? So what we're talking about here is there any interest in developing a joint proposal or setting up a central fund that would provide us all with financial support to develop multi-agency project pipelines? In other words, developing the business case. Amy, next bit. So why do we want this? Well, as you've seen in the last 2 work streams, we've been working with UNDP to develop long-term agreements for power purchase agreements and lease agreements, and we hope to have those signed at the beginning of next year. But then what? What we actually want is 20 viable projects to be ready to go once those OTAs are signed. So we need some money to identify potential projects from the displacement settings that we're talking about, the areas that we're working from, and putting them forward to get PPAs and lease agreements. Obviously, that's going to require money. So what are our options? Where do we get that from? And if we want 20 viable projects, how many actually projects do we need to look at to get it down to 20? Amy, the next one. So the aim of this exercise really is to gauge the interest of our colleagues, you, in developing a joint proposal or a central fund. And then also at the same time to try and crowdsource some of the structural functionality of either or all those options. So, Amy, next slide, please. What we will be doing, Amy, in the next one, please. Yep. what we'll be doing is we'll be breaking out into two groups. One will be led by Thomas and the other one by Paul. And we would just be talking about these two options. So there is no commitment, there is no discussion, sort of, you know, what we're trying to do. We have nothing outlined in our own heads of how we would like this to develop or what it looks like. So we really want to see from you what you think a joint proposal or similar solution would look like. You know, how would it be managed? How big should it be? How do we allocate the funds? Do we need to earmark those so once agencies receive the money, they can, you know, use it for getting business cases developed? Or, you know, if we were to set up a sort of centralized project pipeline fund or something similar, you know, again, how big should it be? Who would manage it? How do we access it? You know, again, do we want this revolving element attached to it? So if you take out and your project goes forward, you put back in to try and get some sort of sustainability around that. So Amy is going to, in a second, just automatically put us into two breakout groups. And then we'll, Amy, next two slides, please, next two buttons, please. So then we will come back and Paul and Thomas will give us a quick, you know, comments on what was discussed. And then we will talk about it again amongst the group to see what we come up with. Now, before we start, does anyone have any questions? Please raise your hand or comment. Okay, all right, Amy, if you can trigger two breakout groups. Okay, is that everyone back? Just wait for a few minutes. Okay, we're going on. We seem to have lost a few in the coffee break. But yeah, Amy, we'll go into the feedback session. You can go into the next slide, please. Okay, so Thomas, can you give us a sort of very brief overview of your discussion around a joint proposal?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mark. Yes. We had a good exchange around this idea of a joint proposal. One of the benefits that were mentioned on a joint proposal is actually to be seen as a joint effort from union agencies. This is potentially good for getting the money, but also is good for getting the buy-in from management, and also to to process this potential project proposal within the UN family, within the larger family, and also to enter in a kind of competition between agencies and between country operations. So it's good to be seen as a joint effort. It was also mentioned that one of the joint efforts we already have is Greening the Blue. So under this label, we could potentially host or at least promote this topic, this proposal. Then we discussed a little bit on would it be possible to or how could we potentially fund this? And of course, traditional grants might be possible, but is there also a way potentially to bring in impact investors? That's what we discussed briefly. But we all agreed that it is kind of difficult for the UN to take out anything which looks like a loan or a credit where we have to pay interest rates. On the other hand, probably a simple way to create a kind of a revolving element is if we report back on the savings and how we use the savings. So meaning if we have, let's imagine there's a payback period of 3 years, that means we would save 30% energy bill every year. What do we do with the 30%? So I think that's already something which we could show to a donor how it is important and how we can achieve and use the savings, achieve our goals with the savings. Yes, and Tina explained a very interesting example where they used a private company to replace the existing lighting through LEDs and paid the investor out of the savings. So this is in similar line with what I just outlined. Then a interesting suggestion came up. We could potentially use at least in the first phase, a joint proposal to work on also the shared premises or the common premises of UN, meaning where many UN agencies, at least 2, share the same offices. And usually in these same offices, same buildings, same compounds, there's one agency who is in charge for the infrastructure. And if we target those shared premises or common premises first, that could also be another incentive to push this forward as a joint UN-wide project proposal. Then we discussed a little bit which countries, apart from the shared premises, what could be interesting reasons to pick and choose certain countries. And it was mentioned like high diesel prices would be interesting, or lowest service quality, or actually potentially the CO2 emissions. So these might be also some interesting technical components on how to evaluate which countries we are choosing. And finally, yeah, I think that covered it, covered most of the points. Anything I forgot, colleagues from the group?
No, great. Well, thanks, Thomas. Anyone from the other group have anything to reflect on from what Thomas has mentioned? Or no? Any hands up? Any comments in the box? Chat box? Okay. No, great. Thanks, Thomas. Paul, if you want to go. Amy, if you can go, just press the next one. Brilliant. Paul, if you would just like to provide 5 minutes feedback from your group.
Great, thanks, Mark. Yeah, we had some very good inputs from our group. We were looking at the idea of this centralized fund for creating the pipeline of projects here, and one of the things that was, the kind of whole thing makes sense from an outside perspective or a high level perspective, but then when you get into the details of it, how is it going to be structured and how do we ensure there's a fair allocation of projects? There's probably a lot more demand out there than the ability of our organizations to react. And given that certain organizations are further along the stage of being able to take actions on this front, then they'd be at a certain advantage or whatever. And so how do you have this independent analysis of that? The history of pool funding, it's challenging enough, certainly for some agencies to receive funding from this, particularly maybe outside the UN. How do you do that? And then there's the regulatory issue to go along with that. And we also had the same point made a few times that the common premises approach probably is the best one for this particular start, given that we know that the demand is going to be quite high, which may then better suit PPAs or leasing. And also the point was made that it's probably less risky. A lot of places where there's lots of different organizations, the land is going to be owned by the government or certainly a lot more secure as is the location. So we can minimize the risk as much as possible. And then in trying to select those locations, William was saying that there's some criteria to use, and you're looking at the environmental impact, how much CO2, etc., is being emitted, and what the costs are, what the local supports are, both within the internal organization and regulatory and otherwise private sector for maintenance, etc. And that will determine that. However, a lot of organizations don't have that data, and without that data, it's very difficult then to analyze whether or not that location is completely suitable. Unless you know what the sort of energy demand of 20 or 30 organizations is, how do you then say that that is suitable? So it would be a matter of trying to adapt these criteria. Similarly, the point was made about reporting. I mean, we're joining together to take this common approach to PPAs and leasing, but we would need to set up reporting criteria and guidelines for how that's done so that we can align what we're saying and how things are done, or even compare approaches with the standard kind of methodology, even if we take different, slightly different approaches. And roles and responsibilities change for different contexts. But yeah, most organizations said, yeah, this could be something we can all go towards, but probably for common premises, maybe not for single agency use where there's no other customer. And we would ideally include INGOs and other organizations not within the UN, but that would need to be, again, worked out. And I think that was it. Anyone like to comment in our group? Have I missed anything out?
Great, thanks, Paul. If anyone would like to ask any questions to, Paul, Thomas, the groups around these two concepts, please raise your hand or write something in the chat box. Okay, well then, Amy, if we can go on to the next slide then, please. Right, so we've talked about the different options for funding a project pipeline. So we're going to ask you to select which one is your preferred. And I'll hand over to Thomas to review the results and Amy to release the poll.
So this poll is not working, unfortunately. Maybe Mark, you could read out the poll, the answers. It's not working with the software.
Mark is being muted.
As well, Mark.
Yeah, Amy, can you put me back as host and then I'll try it. No, it's not coming up. Apologies, everyone, for that. The poll doesn't seem to be working. So the responses that we were looking for, bear with me as I close up. Sorry, we weren't expecting Zoom to cause problems. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the question.
I think I have it, Mark. Do you want me to put it in?
Found it. No, I've found it. I found it now. Thanks, Amy. So let me just drop this into the chat box. So the question is, what is your preferred option for funding a project pipeline to ensure we have 20 viable projects in humanitarian settings ready to go once the LTAs and PPA and lease agreements have been signed with UNDP? So if you think that the option to get 20 business cases is best left to your own agency, just put 1 in the chat box. If you think that the best opportunity to get funding to deliver the business cases for 20 projects, put in 2 in the chat box. If you feel the best option is actually just to develop a central fund that we can all access, put 3. If you think there is a better option, just press 4. Or if you're indifferent and you don't feel that there's any value in this process, then please press 5. Okay, apologies for the process. Wow. Thomas, I can leave you to digest the results, but I think there's a clear winner.
Seems like, yeah. Okay, yeah, the idea of a central fund seems appealing for many of you, which is great, which is good to explore, which we will take into account when we develop the next steps, I would say. Would anyone like to comment on this? Maybe, does anybody have a further opinion, would like to explain why he or she is interested in the central fund idea? I would have expected at least one or a couple of those of you who have chosen number 1, own agency. Maybe can you explain what the limitations are?
Hi, it's Catherine here from the ICRC. I chose the central fund. I think that some of the discussion that emanated from our group is that this is something we're keen to explore as far as possible. Recognition that there will be economies of scale in learning and in opportunities of working together. But I think the barriers to that central fund are still quite high. And really the devil's really in the details. So whilst I think our kind of, fallback position is always that we lead the fundraising activities and we do it ourselves and we go down that route, we're keenly kind of committed to exploring something where, to its course, and a central fund that isn't housed within the UN probably is the option for us. But let's see, let's continue to explore. I think it's potentially a long road. So our answer is we're doing 1, but happy to explore 3 to its due course.
And I mean, part of the whole exercise of this workshop series is the idea of learning from each other and exploring this these joint activities. But sorry, did I cut anybody out? Would anybody else like to comment?
Oliver here. I think the issue a lot of us might have with 1 is that, speaking for UNFPA, we can't really fundraise for these activities. That's not our mandate, right? Our mandate is, safe birth and, public health, making sure every child is wanted. But, environmental sustainability is probably not going to fly if we go to our donors. They're going to say, we give that money to UNEP already, so what do you want? So I assume that, that's the case for a lot of us. And therefore, one is not very prominent here. Over.
Very, very good point. And I heard similar explanations from UNHCR, for example. Yes, exactly. Okay, good. I would say back to you, Mark, for next
Right.
steps.
Thank you, everyone, for doing the poll. And again, apologies for technology letting us down. So next steps. As ever with these series, we will be drafting a very short workshop paper where we will be pulling together some sort of draft recommendations moving forwards. And I suspect you can probably already see what those recommendations might be based on the last poll. But then look at, who really wants to drive this forward, who's got an interest in doing that. So we will put a sort of doodle poll online so that people can highlight which priorities they feel that we should focus on and where they can help us deliver those. So do look out for that. As I said in the last call, apologies with the present workload, we are a little bit behind on those, but they will come very shortly. So bear with us on those. Amy, the next one. So yeah, just to repeat from earlier, there is another meeting, another workshop at 4 o'clock on Thursday at the same time, and this will be focused on the options for paying for the preferred solution. So where we were looking at funding the assessment process and getting the business case up together today, we will be looking at what those options for the preferred solutions we go forward. But again, just keep on, in your thoughts about what the next sort of concrete activities are as we head on to delivering some of these recommendations. Maybe the next one. Yep, just to repeat, this is part of 3 work streams. We're coming to the end of those on Thursday. Amy, next one. So, yep, we're a little earlier, so we can release you to your dinners to carry on with responding to emails and other such activities. So I would just like to thank you once again. I mean, I know this is the 6th workshop that we've run in this series, and the one on Thursday will be the 7th. We really appreciate those that you have stayed on throughout this process and picked up or come in because of the financial element. So thank you very much for that support. It really does help us drive forward what the next steps are so that we can support you. Thomas, I don't know if you have a final word before we head.
No, I was wondering if what is my main takeaway, and I guess I'm gonna repeat what Catherine already said. While there is I think a desire or an interest, at least from many of you, to have a joint proposal, to have a central space, a joint fund or whatever, the devil will be in the details. And but I'm happy, and I think I can speak for you, Mark, and for Amy as well. We are happy to explore the details and see where the devil is, and work this out together with all of you if you're interested in the future. Back to you, Mark.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully see most of you and some new faces again on Thursday. Okay, so ciao. Enjoy your evenings. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
I love kicking people out of this meeting space. Thomas, I saw your text. I think there's a lot of tired people.
Yeah.
It's hopefully it's not tired with this process.
Yeah, this is.
You know, I don't know. I'm glad we got such a clear result at the end, but at the same time, it's the breakout room. Certainly, yours, Thomas, was a struggle, right, for people even to grasp what we were trying to do.
I do think there's interest, and I'm not saying it's. Oh, Paul.
Paul, what happened to the bar?
That's disappointing. Nature.
So, sorry, we should make the introductions. Paul,
I got thrown out of the bar. Jonathan.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, how are you?
Nice background. I like them.
Yeah. West. It's the west of Ireland. It's where I will be having a drink later. But
fantastic. Are you still on holiday, Paul?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the time. I thought you were back in Dublin. But yes, so Paul, Jonathan is our new NORCAP deployee. He started today after an emergency relief flight from Palestine over the weekend. Oh, wow. So very tired, I believe, Jonathan. And for your benefit, Jonathan, Paul Quigley is the ex-senior energy officer at UNHCR and a consultant to us. Okay? Great.
And not to forget, one of the early, how do you say? I used the same word for Paul McCallion earlier on. You're one of the fathers of the GPA. I mean, you came up with this idea. You brought into this.
Grandfather, as Eva Mack likes to say, and then changed to Godfather shortly afterwards. Yeah. What did you think of our group, Amy? You were in that, were you?
Yeah, it was. You did a good job at trying to get claw it out of people, but yeah, it seems like people just aren't grasping it, and there's so many unknowns, I guess, that it's hard to.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of detail to it, whether you do it one way or the other. It's all about how you structure it. It's hard to give a clear answer one way or the other when you don't see how it all works.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think we've gone too fast for everyone, or do you think having them spread out hasn't been useful and that we've lost people in the time between and the 2-day in face-to-face? And I know we couldn't have done it. May have been better in that we've kept people engaged and focused what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we're trying to cover a huge amount of space in a way, because the other, like last week's were very different about procurement and long-term agreements and that kind of. Here we're jumping into finance and it's all related, but it's still very different as a topic. I always find this one particularly difficult. The interagency collaboration discussion is a real. It's not great fun anyway. So
I'm surprised they all came up with a joint fund, though.
Yeah, I was even surprised with that one after that we were talking about that, and most people seem to be saying that it's very complicated to have a joint fund, and it might be better to have separate financing. But then, if we look at one particular, energy source, which is for multiple organizations, then it makes more sense because one particular fund pays for that, and it's for a lot of different agencies, and if everybody benefits.
My only concern with the common approach is that UNHCR doesn't tend to be with anyone else, right? They tend to have their offices quite separate for protection reasons. So, so if we went with this, we'd probably have to focus on compounds in displacement settings that keeps it within our own mandate rather than increasing our mandate. I don't know.
What do you mean? Do you mean that it's not going to be in refugee settings, or? No,
I think with the conversation that we were having, there seemed to be more of a focus on just common premises. So, HQ level, sort of like within a capital city of a particular country operation rather than within a displacement setting. And I think we need to sort of really maintain our focus of our own mandate, right? And try and steer it to a compound in a displacement setting as opposed to...
Yeah, well, that's, I think, where our discussion was more based on the central power source for lots of organizations. It's in the field. It's not HQ level or country office level, because once you're in a city, then you're into a rented premises, which is the electricity connection, maybe a backup generator, but you can't have a joint system when you're all sitting apart and all that kind of stuff. That's not a worker. Whereas if you're all sitting in the same, settlement or whatever it is, and you have your fenced compound next door to everybody else's compound, well, that's easy. That's fine.
Yeah.
We're talking about basically the South Sudan, the Malakal, like this scenario, right?
Yeah. I mean, the same as most large places, they're all sharing the same space in a camp or settlement. So there's no real reason why they can't do it. It's just that they traditionally don't address these things in a joint fashion.
Jonathan, what do you take away from this? I mean, this is the first time as a member of the team. Did you find it quite challenging to understand what we were trying to get out from the team? Did you find it quite, what did you think of the audience and the level of inputs?
You can stop the recording, Mark.
Oh, oops. Oh dear.
You didn't say anything too bad, Mark. It's okay.